Hey everyone, and welcome to my Procreate demo for the piece I call Grigori. So this is my attempt at trying to show you guys my entire method, what works for me for designing a character from scratch. So here is sort of a linear take on what it would be like if, say, somebody came up to you with a list of requirements and was looking for you to design a character around those requirements. This is sort of how, this is just one way, one of many ways that you could potentially develop a character. So here I've just got, for the sake of this exercise, a list of stuff that just came off the top of my head, superhero, alien. So as you can see here, I like the idea of doing something with like a classic monster, and then maybe mixing it with something from the future, a future something. So here you can see I write down future classic monster, question mark, and then a future maybe Frankenstein, creature from the Black Lagoon, vampire, etc., etc. So eventually I end up settling on a future vampire. Now, that was really just pure preference. It's sort of a more interesting exercise if somebody were to come up with all of this for me, but I sort of came up with this idea late at night and I just wanted to start on it. So that's what this is. So you can see here I'm going to be writing a lot during this one just to try and help support the narration. So what I decided was, let's try to design a futuristic vampire where we solve a limitation or an issue and add some sort of fun to it. So that might be, say, for instance, when I say solve a limitation, I mean like a limitation that a vampire might have, like being able to go into the sun. So for my step one, I have rough shape exploration. That's sort of just like a way to like get into the flavor of what I'm trying to come up with. So I'm a head down designer as opposed to a silhouette based designer when it comes to characters. So I sort of start by trying to sketch the head to get like a feel for like what might the rest of this guy's body feel like. I did a quick like little female head sketch right there just to sort of see where I wanted to go, and then once I got sort of that vibe, I did like a real quick thumbnail of what like his body type could be, and then just one more thumbnail to sort of further refine that. This was all done just in one quick setting, just trying to get some ideas done. So you can see I got latched on pretty quick to that one head shape, so I just wanted to sort of continue to flesh that out. So you can see me here just playing with some shapes and, you know, making some decisions in the middle of designing it to decide, oh yeah, I kind of like this, I kind of like no nose, I kind of like really high set eyebrows with like a really almost no forehead with these giant ears. So this is me just trying to get a feel for like what does my vampire look like in this case. And since I'm a pretty big fan of like the whole Nosferatu idea of a vampire, I sort of like the fact that considering that like one of many different types of vampires. So I wanted to go with like, I know it's a little, it sort of goes against the definition, but I wanted to go with sort of like a youthful-ish, bright spirit Nosferatu type thing. I wanted like a positive, fun vampire. I will say that once the sketch got going, it had a little bit of a Lexington vibe, like Lexington from Gargoyles, and I'm a huge fan of Gargoyles, so I just sort of went with that. But one of the big design things that I wanted to make sure I had in here was that I like the idea of him having these big baggy eyes, something to do with like sleep and the fact that he maybe doesn't get enough. Maybe he's really interested in the daytime and that's when he's supposed to be sleeping, so he has that. You'll see later on too, I try to take that into account when I do the actual design. So now here what I've done is I've taken that really small thumbnail of the full body. I like the general vibe of that. So now I've got the head just so I can remember sort of what his head looks like, and then I've got this blown up thumbnail that I'm doing like a slightly tighter rough over. What you'll see a lot here is a lot of roughs upon roughs upon roughs, just to make sure that I'm not committing too early and that I'm actually exploring some of the shapes. So now here you've seen a super rough thumbnail blown up and gone to a slightly tighter rough just to fill in some of the information there. And now I'm going to yet another tighter rough sketch. And this is all just because I'm essentially making decisions, and like I said, I'm not overcommitting and I want to just explore it. Like right there you see me pop his shoulder out a little bit, and that's because, you know, I'm solving a lot of these problems as I go. I get a lot of questions throughout all my videos about what brushes I use. I highly recommend you go back and look at the video Pomus Mit Mayo. In that one I show my pencil brushes and I also show some like more watercolory brushes so you can see what I use. In those I talk about my fat pencil, and then I have like an even fatter pencil now that I use. It's even thicker. And just for a quick explanation, That's the technical pencil in Procreate, and then I've just maximized, or turned up, I should say, the maximum brush size, so that it can be thicker and fatter. That's all it is, and nothing else fancy. I try to use as many stock brushes as possible. So after I had that cleaner rough, I duplicated it a few times, and I've got this lineup. So now, as you saw before, I said let's try and solve an issue or limitation. So what I decide here is let's solve the need for blood and increase his resistance to sunlight. So vampires need blood. Vampires can't go in the sun, at least in most things. So here we enter step 2. Are we still doing steps? I sort of try to keep loose steps, but really, I mean, who can tell at the end of it? And then we'll just call this costume exploration, but still sort of shape stuff. So now that I've got this doll that I can start basing everything off of, I can go in and do super rough costume designs, basically. Depending on the project you might be working on, or the client that you have, you might do a lot of this stuff. I did a job once where I had to do a lot of armor designs and created a lot of sheets like this, and did, you know, I don't remember how many, but a ton of armor designs just to try and get through them all. And part of it's that creative process too, of saying, you know, your first idea might not be your best, so you have to do a lot just to double check, and you'll see that here. So giant blood tank on his back, and then the second one, it's sort of the same idea, maybe this like big thing. I like the idea of it being a little ridiculous, that it's like too much overcompensation for the fact that he needs blood. I like the idea of day vision goggles, so if he's completely covered, which is what I'm going for in a lot of these, that he then has these day vision goggles so that he can see in the day better, which sort of goes towards that idea of him having those big eyes where he's got like the bags under his eyes. I really like the idea of a vampire who has to put on all this shit to get out into the world. You can see there I put hoodie for keep it simple stupid, just because like if he was going to be completely covered, just do some basic shit like a hoodie. As you can see here, this is technically probably the most straightforward design, which is just some sunglasses and a gimp suit and a tumbler of blood. I've solved all of the problems that I set out to solve in one design, but obviously that's not like a very cool design. So I put here a reminder to think iconic, and then assume he can move his ears like a dog, which was more just a note for me as to like how his ears might be able to move. You can see there I toyed for a second with adding hair. And then I bring back the hood, so I brought back a hoodie because, like I just said, that's just really like basic and straightforward, so why not? Ultimately, when I'm done with this design, you'll see that I didn't 100% cover him. That was really more just because it didn't look as cool if he was 100% covered. There were probably ways I could have done it and still made it look cool, but I just decided to go this way with it, essentially. So just went with the big asymmetrical left elbow hook thing, and there we go. So now here's my just quick voting scheme. I'll repeat it so you can see it. I just went through and I was like, nah, I don't have a thought, and then I like this one, I like this one, I don't like this one, and then I re-voted at the end and decided that that one right there is ultimately the one that I want to go with, the one all the way to the right. The other ones had some merits, but I just thought that this one was the most fun. So there we go. This guy is the one that we're going to take all the way to finish. So step 3, tight base lines. It really depends on how thorough you want to be with your design and like what the purposes are for it. I just thought that this would be sort of like a fun exercise as part of the whole thing. So I import all those sort of low res sketches and bad quality I have into this new document. And some of this is actually easier to do in something like Photoshop, meaning handling all these files. But since this is all Procreate, I just wanted to sort of show that it could still be done here. So here I have that rough sort of doll from before, and now I'm just trying to apply some tight lines so that we can use it as a base to build the rest of the costume and just finish off the design. So here on this version, I'm being a little bit more concerned with anatomy, a little bit more concerned with finish quality and what I want my lines to be. When I was in the middle of recording this one, I used the middle recording quality, and then as I go to the final drawing for this whole thing, I switch to a higher quality so that you guys can get just a better look at it. Sometimes with Procreate, I find it just a little bit hard to remember to set up certain things like resolution or the actual dimensions of the piece, since you can't alter it once you've started. So that's just something that I always have to remember to do. So this is probably a little lower res than ultimately would have liked. But when I'm done doing this drawing, I then transfer it into a higher res file, and I work from that in order to produce the tight final lines and then the final color illustration as well. I've said it before in previous videos that it's kind of interesting because you guys get to see this all in one go, but due to time constraints and the fact that I have a family and a job and all that kind of things and just lots of distractions, I actually did this over the course of a couple nights where I could get just like a few spots here or there, probably like 4 nights all told. So it's pretty interesting because sometimes when you see that what's happening in these pieces, it might actually be, you know, like I can tell you right now looking at this foot that I was watching Mr. Robot when I was doing that, but like another part I did like on a train, and another part I did when I was like at my desk at work or on a lunch break, and just it's kind of interesting when I go back and rewatch these because I get to think of all the different things that I was doing and how I may have only gotten 10 minutes here or 30 minutes there or 3 hours like in one other sitting. So it's just sort of fun for me to relive these. As far as what's going on right now in the actual piece, this is me just essentially going through and making sure that my lines are clean and that I'm producing something that is stable and strong enough that I can then base the final design off of it. Some of my decisions here with like the giant feet and the giant hands, some of that is inspired just by the idea that I kind of wanted him to be like Nosferatu, but it's also like way more exaggerated than that. So it was really just trying to seek out like an interesting silhouette or something that might be interesting once this guy's up and moving, because like when I imagine him, you know, running around and jumping and his toes are hooking onto buildings and his hands can, you know, grab somebody maybe around the waist because they're so big. I like to think about that stuff when I'm designing the characters, and I think there could be some like really cool opportunities with his anatomy to sort of show it off because of his exaggerations basically. So there you go. That's the tight lines for the base version of this character, for which I can now start building the rest of the costume on. So step 4, tight lines on the final design. So here we are jumping into that. Right there is where we're headed towards, which is the final design. So I bring into a new high-res file the base doll, and then I put a little thumbnail there so I can remember what the design is, since it's hard to jump back and forth in Procreate. I wanted to stick that in there. Oh, you can also see my little note there. Since his watch is on his right hand, it sort of denotes that he's left-handed, and that maybe that's why his blade is on his left arm. And again, just fun things to think about when you're designing a character, something that can add to the story. One of my favorite things about character designs is you can add like one little tweak here or there, and you can end up getting all this backstory, or you might give a writer the opportunity to create a ton of backstory, and that's some of the best things you can do as a character designer. Something as simple, I mean, you could throw a tattoo or something on a character that just makes them, oh, he's got a tattoo, okay, maybe this character is a little wild, or maybe this character belongs to a thing, or whatever. Like, there's lots of just sort of inherent ideas when you just throw a tattoo on a character, but you could also maybe make a tattoo on a character that is a real specific symbol or a real specific subject matter, and then that might make you wonder what that's about, and then it could go into an interesting backstory. Hopefully not a super lame backstory like Jack's tattoo in Lost, if any of you are Lost fans. Hopefully not something as terrible as that, but anyway, so here's a good example where I put the watch on the right wrist, and that might imply that he's left-handed, and who knows what could come of that down the line. So you can see here when I started doing the tight lines, I started with the belt. There were a lot of places I could have started, but really I just sort of started from the middle and then worked my way around. I feel like there was a lot going on in this character, and some of it I didn't know what I was going to do yet specifically, like what you're seeing right there, all that stuff with his like blood dispense system or whatever. So I just sort of started with the base geometry for that belt, and then I'm like, okay, I'll get back to that belt later, but at least I started. Because as a lot of you know, a lot of art is just starting. Just do it and get there, and it might not be the best, but that gives you something to start with when you do it another time. So here I am just going in and doing a clean take on that rough to the right, and I'm using that base. I gave myself a decent enough dull that it makes it really easy to sort of figure out where everything is and then build off of it. So here, just doing the right sleeve. I like the idea that one sleeve was sort of zhuzhed and then the other sleeve was zhuzhed further because he has this big contraption on his arm. I'll be honest, that big contraption is a little... I didn't entirely figure out how that thing works, but I think that it at least has enough sort of general mechanery to look like it makes some sense. Sometimes when you're doing a mishmashy type character, and mishmash I mean like the fact that he's got like a hoodie and pants on, but then he's got all this technical stuff, you sort of lose track of the style of your technical parts, which is something you just saw in the shoulder piece. I had like these black elements in there, and it sort of all of a sudden looked a little bit different, so I eliminated those and brought the shoulder in so that I could try and get away from that, basically. So there I still have his day vision goggles on. I liked the idea. That's part of my thinking iconic. I wanted to put that slit eye instead of doing big goggles, even though I think big goggles are like an awesome design element. I just didn't want to fall into that trap, so instead I gave him a little bit of a Cyclops visor in a circular visor, which is funny because if you've ever seen my Cyclops from a long time ago, I gave him like a big circular eye for his visor, so it's sort of like combining classic Cyclops and my old Cyclops illustration into one thing. So now here you can really see how I use layers even during the drawing stage. You can see I had that base geometry for the belt, and then I went in and over it started laying in all of the buckle work and then erasing what was underneath it and building and building and building, and that's sort of how we get a nice little accessory like this, which is pretty high detail, and it works because like if this were going to a modeler or a costume designer or something, they would want all of those kind of details so that they knew exactly what they were trying to build. So now here we're just working on that extra zhuzhed sleeve. Eventually I'll get to the part where I really start working on the blade and the sort of robotic left arm stuff. And I want to mention it now. Oh, there you could see that the hand was tangential with the knee pad, so I just went into the lines and tweaked the hand just enough so that it didn't rub up against that. Again, one of the positives about working digitally. So eventually when I get to that elbow piece, you'll see that I do what I've done in past ones where I brought in a PNG of a circle. Or actually in this one I might have used my newer method, which is I just take the circle brush and I make a giant dot and then I manipulate that dot just to get sort of a perspective circle, like an oval, so that I could finish off some of those circular pieces on the elbow. Right now I'm just doing the sort of shiny black stuff, the like leathery latexy sort of secret ops type stuff. Sometimes it's a little hard for me to reconcile that I might use like a illustration trick that's sort of like a classic comic book lined art thing, and then I know that I might render it or something later, and it's sort of I sort of struggle with how I'm going to treat that, and I think I actually do a good job of it on this one. I sort of figured out like a nice language for it. So here I've just got like a somewhat classic comic book way of representing that, and then I go back in and you'll see when I get to the paint part. I want to talk about the elbow now. You can see that I roughed in that elbow real fast, the big blade and everything, because I didn't have like that I knew I was going to struggle with since it's a big hard shape and it's sort of hard to do a lot of shapes in Procreate. So now I go in and I do a rough of the watch, and then I over the rough do the tighter lines for it. And now here we go. You can see that black dot that appeared for a second. That's essentially me using a black dot brush, and then I warp it to get these like perspective circle, and then I'm using that as a selection from there on out, and then drawing within that. And so you can see I layered in all of those circles, and then I went back through and erased it all, so that I had, you know, so that it looks correct basically. You can go back through and watch that again, and you can see how I construct it. And so now I'm just going in and cleaning up the big weird blade shape. I know it's big and chunky, and it's sort of a question of how does this thing cut. I don't exactly know, but for the sake of this, I didn't think it was too important to go into. However, I would say that if I was on a production and I was trying to really solve this thing, it would have to have more work put into it. I'll be honest. So now here I am finishing the blood tubes that are sort of stuck into some sort of a machine that's on his back that's then pumping into him. I based these off of the Shizuma drive, if you know what that is. This is a homage to the Shizuma drive, sort of stuck in the side, although I deliberately did not include the floating ball in the middle. I wanted to put the bubbles in instead, and I didn't want it to be too literal to the Shizuma drive, but that's essentially what that's based off. So here you can see I am done. Phew, all the lines are done. It was quite a detailed character, so that's all wrapped up. So you can see that rough, and then you can see the clean lines, and there you go. I also duplicated the lines and did a soft blur just to give it that sort of look, that slightly fuzzy look. So now we move on to step 5, the flats. We're now getting into color. So way back when, I used to only flat on gray. I used to only color on like gray backgrounds. As time's gone on, I felt that always gave me too dark of a picture, even though I understand like there's a better way I could have handled it. Now I usually flat on white. Here especially, because I'm starting with just doing a big solid shape, I start on white just so that I can see the delta of what I've painted and what I haven't. So here I've already made the decision that the way I'm going to handle the tubes is going to have some sort of transparency to them, and the way that I'm going to handle his sort of glider wing type things was going to have some sort of transparency to them. So what I'm going to do here is only flat in his body and the blade and all that, but then the ends of the tubes like that right there, and then everything else that more or less is going to have like an effect applied to it will be on its own layers. I thought because I was going to ultimately just do flats and then a shadow layer that I wasn't going to run into layer limitations on this file, but then I ended up doing it because I bring in a lot of effects later and I like keeping all my layers separate. So ultimately I ended up duplicating this file and then squeezing a couple layers together in order to finish the piece ultimately. So now this is just sort of the standard wrap up. If you're wondering what brush I used for this, sorry, I keep forgetting to mention that stuff. I just went into the airbrushing section of Procreate and got that, really crisp circle brush. That way I'm 100% confident in what's getting laid down. So here I am now on 2 separate layers doing the tubes and the wings, and then I just lowered the opacity of those so that I had different, so they look different, so I could keep it all separate. And then as you can see, I then said flats all done. So now, core flats all done. This, what I refer to as the solid, which is the solid form all on one layer. That's the part that's done. So now what I can do is I can use that solid form as a selection, and then I can go through and start adding in all these other flats on layer after layer. Ultimately, what I'll do is what you guys have seen in my select paint, select clear video. I'll do that throughout the entire piece in order to do the shadows. So every flat is on its own layer, and then things like the tubes are starting to get special treatment because I want to communicate that that's glass, and that there's and I start doing tricks where I'm getting rid of the lines and spots in order to try and give them a little bit more of a true to life look, although obviously still very stylized. So here I declare core flats done. So what I mean by core flats is I feel like in general these are the right things that I need in order to then later add maybe some details to the flats. So now what we move into is step 6, the render. So here I put in some light gradients for the wings, and then I start knocking back some of the lines on that section. And then the next step, well, you'll see the lines change color because throughout this entire thing I sort of tweak the lines, or tweak the wings. But I'm going to zoom here in on what I do with the tubes and the blood for a minute, because a lot happens here pretty quickly. So just some gradients to make it bright in spots, like there's some sort of glow in there, lighting up the sort of top surface of that. And then you can see right there I pull away almost all the lines on that section, and I'm just relying on the flats now. I add a little bit of shadow in there to make it look like that surface is curved more, and then I go in and I use white on the bubbles and lower the opacity on those and add little glints on the bubbles just to really try and sell the depth. That's really what I'm trying to sell on that section. You'll see later I go back in and do more details still. So now what I've started is the shadow process. I wanted to make sure that I handled sort of the effects of the wings and some of the effects of the blood before I got into the shadows, to then sort of establish them as like a base before the shadows end up getting applied. So now I'm going through and I'm doing the shadow layer, and it's just like I've said in the past. I'm starting from my lowest layer, and then that's what I'm sort of focusing on when I'm adding the shadow. So I did it on the skin, and then I move up the next layer, I select that layer, clear the shadows from that part, and then I select it again, and then on the shadow layer I'm still painting. So if you're looking for a more detailed breakdown of that, like I said before, look at my video, select paint, select clear, I think is what it's called. That is the you'll see the thumbnail. It's like these colorful blobs basically that are just floating there. That's where you can go to get more detail on that exact technique. So here I'm just going through with the soft sort of airbrush, and I'm applying all these shadows. Now, a lot of art is about planning, and a lot of art is about process, which is sort of why these videos might interest some of you, is because process is such a big part of doing art. The other thing is sort of the planning of knowing where you're going. So I sort of know where I'm going to try to end up with this piece. I know that I'm going to want the blood stuff to glow. I know that I'm going to want a bounce light. I know that I'm going to want like to him to be darkened from the bottom to the top and things like that. So really what you get used to from doing so much art, the reason why you do so much is because you're sort of able to call the shot when you go into doing the drawing. That's sort of what you're looking for. You might not actually end up with exactly what you set out to make, but the fact that you're sort of like in the right area is really what you're looking for. So there's yet another wing change. So there you can see also some shadow stuff get applied. I changed some of the line colors. There's just like a lot of tweaks that sort of happen within there. I'm sorry it goes by a little fast. Some things like that do. So anyways, now I'm detailing the belt, and then I'm adding in the knuckles because I decided I wanted to change the flat there so I could bring attention to it. Here I'm placing the shine on the tubes in the back. And then here I finally begin the rim light. So there's a lot of jumping around back there. I apologize, it's a little quick. Please go back and look at it again. Here's where I'm doing the rim light. At first I decided that I wanted to be 100% solid, just solid white. But then you'll see that I sort of go back in and I soften it a little bit. That's because at first I thought it'd be a good idea, and I don't think that's a bad idea. I just ultimately didn't want to do that. So you'll see in a minute here, I'll start going back. Yeah, right there. You can see it all get softened a little. So I'm applying it all with a hard brush, but then I'm going back in with a soft airbrush eraser to knock that back a little bit. Another trick that I don't actually do in here that's sort of nice for giving a rim light like a nice colorful fall off is you paint the rim light in white like I've done here, and then you duplicate that layer, and on the bottom layer you color shift the underneath rim light to a color, like a rich color, and it'll give it a nice fall off, so it goes from a bright white to a color, whatever you're looking for there. So there I did a little bit of subsurface scattering on the wings underneath his arms. Since the light's sort of coming from the side, almost back, but mostly from the side, I thought that'd be just like a nice touch to throw in there. So there's some more subsurface scattering in his ear, and some of these layers are all just jumping around because I'm testing various things out. I thought it'd be nice to throw a texture in the background so that you could see it through his wings a little bit better, because his wings are transparent. I'm repeating that here so you could really see that, but I ultimately hated it, so I got rid of it. So now here is the final flats and colors, full rendering. So now step 7 is what I just referred to as staging, which is what can I do now to sort of make my final design look neat. And just sort of have it feel complete. Obviously, I focused in the beginning on giving this guy like a little bit of personality, and then I covered his face up with a mask, and I sort of like that in a character that's wears a mask then reveals to actually maybe be really outgoing or really friendly or just an interesting personality underneath. So I thought it'd be nice to pair this with a headshot, since I did that rough headshot in the beginning to sort of inspire me. You might not know what that might inspire whomever has to look at your design down the road. So I started working on this portrait alongside it. So I just basically brought in some thumbnails of the previous versions of his head that I drew. And then I did a super rough, and now I'm doing a tighter rough. And then you'll see me flip it. I actually originally flipped it for symmetry because I knew a lot of the symmetry was a little whack when I was drawing it like this. But then I thought that him facing to the right would actually be better to pair with the full body shot in the end. So then I left it that way. You can see here that I've put some of his costuming on him, and I sort of have this skull cap that goes up around his head. But I really didn't like the way that looked. So that might look good in the context of whatever world he's in, like if he's just sort of scooting his goggles up and you can see, but I just thought it looked too alien or too retro sci-fi, which I love retro sci-fi, but it just didn't work for this. So I eventually get rid of it. In fact, you can see at one point during this drawing, I put a little seam going down the side of his neck because I was going to leave it in there, and then I realized that I don't even have it. It's not even like a neck to skull cap in the drawing. It's just a skull cap. It's just like a mask thing. So I realized that if I had made that decision in the other version, which I made that decision in order to get more color into him and bring his blue neck out more, that if I did that, like, what's the point of having it on this? So ultimately I just have his hoodie and the zipper and then some like glow coming up from that, and that's really all I do to hint at his costuming. The rest of this is supposed to just be focusing on him and his personality anyways. So also up until now, you see that I draw him with sort of no irises or pupils. He just has sort of these, you know, glowy eyes, but that's not really, I didn't think that was really that interesting. Ultimately, we've seen so many characters like that, so instead I just wanted to give him some unique eye anatomy. So when you see me do the actual colors, you'll see that he's got an iris and a pupil, but they're both very, very blurred. And I don't exactly know what that's trying to communicate. It was more just like an interesting design choice, and so maybe it's to communicate that he is like a bat, and maybe he's slightly blind, or maybe he's got really unique anatomy with his eyes, and that's why he's sensitive to the light and all that. So really it's just trying to give him sort of a very interesting look that even asks questions for me. And then if I were in part of some bigger production where I was trying to make this character work in a grander scheme, we would all be asking those questions, and we would have to come up with answers and make the character sort of more interesting. So now here, just like before, I'm using blue as his skin tone and sort of the underlayer. I also use it as my solid for this because I wanted this headshot to go a little bit quickly. So here you can see he's got the irises, he's got the pupils. They're hard right now, meaning hard edged, but then I go in and blur them to really give the look that I'm going for. I like the idea of him having these dark eyes, meaning like bags with a slight red, like he's not getting enough sleep or like the light is bothering him. And so then I'm just going through and just adding in all these sort of surface details, a little bit of blush in the nose but not in the cheeks. I didn't think that was going to be for him, so to speak. And so now I'm adding the shadow layer, and all of this is being done with the exact same setup as the full body, so that when I've got them together, they work together. And the shadow in this case is like a slightly peachy color set to multiply. So I set him up with the same light source as the other one. That's not super important because he's sort of transposed into the, superimposed into the picture anyways. But I just thought it would look nice, sort of going with the whole idea of stage 7 staging. This is all about presentation at this point. So you'll also notice that my rim light is on top of the lines. The same is true in the full body, and that's so that I can overpower the lines when I have to. So there you get the red glow coming up to hint at the blood thing on his chest, some of that light coming in, and some of his subsurface scattering on his ear. And then here I just throw that entire image in as one big chunk, and I erase away at the edges so that he can feel like he's faded into it. And then I just put a little tag on it that says character concept and I name him Grigori because that just seemed like it fit. Maybe it's a little stereotypical, but whatever, I needed a name. So there's the final version. This was a very long video. I want to thank you for sitting through the entire thing. I hope this was cool. You could see sort of a beginning to end process for me for designing a character. Not the only way that I do it, but just a way that I might. So thanks a lot for watching. If you like this video, please hit subscribe and like, and otherwise, I'll see you at the next one. If you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.